Well, good morning, everyone. Over here in Australia, it's literally just spring has sprung. It's suddenly seems like we're heading into summer, which is great. For those of you over in the United States or in the Northern Hemisphere, apologies, I think you're probably heading into winter, many of you. But look, today's talk is a little bit different, and I'm going to be sharing with you a story to start with that nearly saw me lose an amazing student earlier this year and created my approach to answer that question that I get asked a lot, which is how do you fit it all in? How do you fit everything into a 30-minute lesson? And the answer is actually really simple, and I'll tell you what that is in just a moment. But firstly, the story. So I took on a transfer student whose name is James. I think he would have been about 10 at the time. He's now 11 and still with me, but only just because I almost lost him as a student. And this kid is really musical. He loves music. He came to me because a previous teacher really hadn't inspired him very much. And his mum was looking for someone to keep him interested because she knew that he had some skills and interests, and she herself, mum, Susan, is also a talented pianist herself. So she was obviously very passionate about wanting James to continue. So she actually found me online through my work there, and I managed to fit him into my schedule. We were having a fantastic time for, I think, probably about 6 months or thereabouts. However, what happened one day earlier this year after I'd been seeing him for quite some time and I thought everything was going really well is his mum rang up and said, "Look, Tim, James, he's just not sure about continuing his piano." And I thought, oh, geez, I thought I'd done everything possible to keep this kid engaged. I mean, we were composing and playing cool chord drills and using lots of apps and playing written music and exploring all different styles. Like there was everything we were doing. And she said, yeah, the reason is that it's all too much. You're trying to do too much with him and he's getting completely overwhelmed in the process. And so what I had to do is really take stock of what I was trying to do for this young student. And being me, and for those of you who have followed what I do for any length of time will know that I'm full of new ideas quite a lot. The problem is, of course, that I was exploring all these new ideas with my students, as I tend to, but his focus was so fragmented in so many different ways that he really couldn't focus on any one thing for long enough to get really good at it, and so he was feeling like he wasn't progressing. And I've now learnt that James is a student who really loves his piano when he gets to a point where he can really play his pieces well. And until that point, it can be a real struggle for him. Now, do let me know. Give us a heart or a thumbs up if you've got a student like this who you've found out really struggles with that early stage learning process of new pieces, and could play pieces that he or she knows for years and years and years, even if it's the same piece, just because they really love playing it. If you've ever had that experience, then let me know with a thumbs up, because I think this is probably more common than I think anyway. And so my approach is often to give students a very broad education, which I think is wise, but to keep moving on fairly quickly, because I assume that students are going to get bored if they're playing the same piece for any particularly long amount of time. In fact, for James, it was the exact opposite. He needed to get to that point where he could start to play his piece to really have fun, to motivate him to practice, and then he'll play it more and get better. And then you could add some other things to the mix as well. So it was a really interesting experience, and it taught me a lot. And the thing that it taught me is that I was trying to do too much in my lessons with students. There was just too many great ideas out there that I wanted to try all at once. And it wasn't necessarily the right thing for the student. It particularly wasn't for James, who needed smaller tasks over a longer period of time to feel like he's getting some mastery. And so anyway, the story's great. James is still learning with me. He's having great fun. Susan and Susan is his mum. They're playing duets together now. We're doing 2 piano music. It's great fun. He's having a great time. And I've learned that for James, having at least 1 or 2 pieces that are almost finished is a great thing and an important thing for him to keep on having in his lessons. Just tweaking things a little bit each time, because he just loves playing through them when he knows that he can get them. Now I can see there's a few people on live. If you're watching this live, do say hello. Great to hear who's watching, because I can't see, I can just see the number of people who are watching. Say hi if you're feeling comfortable to do that. Give us a thumbs up or a heart if that story sounds at all familiar to you. And if you're watching the replay, do let me know as well. I always check out my comments afterwards. Okay, so the upshot of all of that experience is an approach that I have now to lesson planning, and it's incredibly simple, and it's just called my 3 keys. In answer to the question that I asked at the beginning, this question that I guess are asked by teachers all the time: how do you fit it all in? Tim, you've got all these great ideas. I'm swamped with new ideas from all the blogs that I follow, all the Facebook Live videos I watch. What am I meant to do with all this information? How do I fit it all in? Well, the answer is you don't. You don't fit it all in. You can't possibly do it. And if you do, you might end up in a situation like I did with my student, James. So instead, I want you to think about all of that stuff that you see online. If you're a member of my community, all the resources that are in there, all the videos that you could possibly watch, all the new teaching ideas out there. I want you to think of it a little bit more like Foxtel or just the television. Now, no one would think of, well, maybe some people do, but I think it's unlikely people would go, oh my goodness, there's too many television channels, I'm going to get rid of my television and not watch it. It's not something that most people would do. Instead, you go, okay, well, I know what kind of things I like watching. I know that I need to keep up with Game of Thrones or whatever it is because people are going to be talking about it. Or I know that I really want to watch these documentaries because I'd really like to keep up with this or learn some new things, right? So you don't throw out the whole television or remove your Foxtel subscription because there's too much there. You just pick and choose exactly what you want. So I like to think of music, blogs, podcasts, all of those things in the same way. Yes, by all means, listen to them, watch them, read them, those kinds of things, but don't get overwhelmed by them. Don't let yourself feel overwhelmed by the amount of information out there. Instead, pick the direction that's right for you and your students. What are you trying to achieve for the student? I always come back to this question. And how does some of the information that you're finding online help you get there? They are the crucial questions. So if you know that a student really wants to do composition and you're not very strong at that, then go out there and find the information you can about it and put some of that into action. But if that's not of interest, then watch it, get interested in it, but you don't have to do anything about it. That's totally fine. Great to see Cynthia on the call too. Looks like Tom Donald is watching as well. G'day to Tom. All right, so let's talk about how I've approached this planning now after this experience with James. And I now do this with all my students. I call it my 3 keys to a comprehensive piano lesson plan. And it just involves me remembering that I need to teach 3 things and just 3 things. That's all I need to do. All right. Now, I have actually created a download for you about this, which looks like this. And you can see the 3 keys are listed in these 3 rows of colors. So what are the 3 keys? Well, the 3 things that I think every lesson must contain to be comprehensive and for you to make sure you're covering all bases. The first one is technique. Technique, obviously important. There are various ways that you can go about doing this. It doesn't necessarily just mean scales, and I'll talk about some ideas in a moment. So technique, every student should be learning, in my opinion, some repertoire. I don't teach any students, unless they've specifically come to me for composition, for example, I generally will always teach repertoire to students, and that will be a variety of genres and styles and all those kinds of things. I think that is important. I certainly teach reading, I teach classical music, all of those great things. I'm not just a pop teacher or anything like that. It's about a mix of variety. So technique, you need to cover technique, you need to cover repertoire, and as you can guess, something creative. They're my 3 keys. If I cover those 3 areas in a lesson with a student, I feel like I've done what I need to keep this student engaged, learning, growing as a musician. Any more than that, and either the student will feel overwhelmed or I'll feel like I'm trying to do everything in 3-minute chunks and it will just be an absolute disaster. I remember when I first started teaching, and as most of you know, the exam system over here is quite prevalent as it is over in the UK. A lot of students would come in and I would feel I need to be a good teacher, teach their exam pieces, test their sight reading, test their oral, ask some general knowledge questions, and try and cover pretty much every base for an exam student in one lesson. And in half an hour, totally impossible and not very constructive. There's better ways to do things. And so now I've got this much clearer approach of just trying to cover these three key areas of learning. Now, what of course you'll see on the sheet, and you can download this from my website, it's at timtopham.com/3keys, just written like that, number 3 and keys, is that for each of the 3 areas, I've got 3 suggestions of things that I do with students. So we'll go through each of those now relatively quickly. So in technique, again, 3 areas for each of these. So the 3 types of technique work that I do with students, one is our scales and arpeggios. Most people are familiar with scales and arpeggios. Drills, come back to that in a moment. And then over here, your oral, your sight reading, your general knowledge, and those kinds of ancillary activities that are often tested in auditions and examinations. For drills, I love doing chord drills with students. So this is where students can practice playing chords around the piano. So one of the drills might be moving chromatically ascending major chords. C, C sharp, D, D sharp. I'm probably not in the right key, I don't have perfect pitch, I apologise. But you get the idea. Chord drills like that often form a part of the teaching that I do. Maybe they then do that in first inversion. Maybe they move around the circle of fifths and do some kind of drill. Da 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 dum bum bum G. Da 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 dum bum bum. You get the idea. I could do another video on that if it's of use. Let me know if that would be helpful, how I do chord drills with students. And for that, I always use an app too. So I generally use iReal Pro. iReal Pro. Brilliant app. I had the creator on my podcast last month. One of the best apps for simple, easy to play along backings, particularly when you're doing things like drills. Chord drills are not an exciting activity, but I tell you what, James, I was just telling you about James, he does these and he comes into lessons and often the first thing he does when he sits down is he starts going as fast as he can through all the chords just to see how well he can do them. And then we have a little bit of a speed challenge. So that can be a bit of fun. So chord drills, and then oral, sight reading, and general knowledge. One of those 3 are the things that I'll generally pick for a student. So I'm not trying to do all 3 of these every lesson. Forget it. Just pick one in each of these 3 areas. Okay? So technique, we might choose for one day, we're just going to do scales and arpeggios. All right? For the next section, repertoire, I consider this again in 3 areas. I think about this as completed repertoire, pieces that the student knows and is just polishing, perhaps for an exam, an audition, an assessment, something like that. But pieces that the student have already done and put all the hard work in and are not too difficult to play. But we're just perhaps refining them or getting them exam or assessment ready. Then we have what I call easy reads or 1 week pieces. I'm a big advocate of the approach of students learning lots of repertoire at lots of different levels. So while students are going to be learning music at their, the highest level that they're able to play at, that music takes a long time to learn most often. So while they're doing that, I love giving them easy pieces. It expands their vocabulary, broadens their repertoire, and it means that they are improving their sight reading all the time. Because 1 week pieces, you don't have much time to work on. You've got to get good at your sight reading. Hi to Victoria and also Billy. And the other area here is, as I said before, challenging repertoire. So if the student is working towards a grade level, perhaps they're grade 4 student, challenging repertoire would be grade 4 pieces. And maybe they're doing 1 or 2 of those. Easy reads might be preliminary grade 1 level pieces, or maybe some piano duets, anything like that. And then completed repertoire would be music that they've already played and is ready for performance. So again, I would choose one of these. So one from the top line, one from the middle line with students, and then in the bottom we've got creative. And most of you will know that this is where I love spending most of my time. So again, 3 ideas here for you. Just choose one of them. You don't need to do everything. First one, improvising or composing. If you've never done anything improvisationary with students, then please go to my website. One of the best places to start would probably be the 12-bar blues. You could just Google Tim Topham 12-bar blues. You'll find information about that. In here, improvising is just getting students exploring sounds on the piano. And generally I'll play along with them, or I'll use some kind of backing track. More often than not, I'll do something with chords. And you can find out about my approach with chords and composing through my 4-chord composing lesson plans. I've got them on my website. Just go to timtopham.com/chords and you'll find out about that. So improvising or composing. So when students are starting to improvise, they'll start to settle on some ideas about music that they like and sounds they like. So you can start turning what's an improvisation, something that's different every time, start getting them to think about ways to repeat the things that they like, to start settling on a desired composition. So that's how the two combine. So composing is perhaps, if you've been doing some improvising for a while, for a student it's now like time to say, all right, let's actually decide what you want to do and let's turn this into a composition with a beginning, a middle, and an end. In the middle, lead sheet playing. So if you're unsure about lead sheets, that's just music where students, instead of reading the music, they're going to be following the chord symbols like the guitarist would play. Alternatively, they might be following a lyric chart with chords above it. I think this is a fundamental skill for every pianist to have, and it's something that we often neglect teaching because we were never taught ourselves how to do this. But I'm amazed by the number of pianists who can do it and do it really well and know how important it is, but haven't taken that step to actually helping students to do the same thing. There are many, many ways to get started. I would start with simple songs like Let It Be by the Beatles, because you've only got C, G and F chords and you've got a whole song to play. And I call this very much creative because you're only, with a chord chart or a lead sheet, getting a very limited amount of information. So you have to be creative in the way that you play it. And adding some left-hand patterns and things like that all comes into the mix. So that's a really great creative way to approach music reading from a different angle. So I like doing that as well. And then down here, off-page activities. So that's where you take a piece of music that a student is learning and you extrapolate it and do something with it that's not written into the music. The simplest way to do this is with a piece of music like a 12-bar blues, to take generally 12-bar blues pieces, if they're written down, are in an ABA, a ternary form. So to play the A section as written, and then for the B section the second time round, maybe get the student to improvise using a blues scale while they play the left hand that's written. I've done a lot of work in this area recently in producing the new series of Piano for Leisure books for the Australian Music Examination Board. And one of the things that I've tried to do as much as possible is add some creative off-page activities that teachers can do with students using the material in the pieces, if it's suitable. It's not going to work for every piece, but for a lot of pieces it does, particularly if there is a clear left-hand pattern. And if you can choose, you can work out what the key of the piece is. If those two things are in order, oftentimes you'll be able to get students improvising based on the ideas from the piece. Okay, so that's the overview that you'll be able to find on this download. And so what I like to do when I'm thinking about a student's lesson is to, and I've actually laminated this card, so you can literally go, all right, so James, we're going to do some drills first up today. We're going to check in your completed repertoire and we're going to spend a little bit of time on your challenging repertoire, and then we're going to do some lead sheet playing. And there's my lesson plan, all finished. All right. Now, of course, depending on where you're at with students and your own piano teaching, you might need to do a little bit more than that. But for me, that gives me an overview that I can use with students, which isn't going to overwhelm me or them, most importantly. Now, if this looks like something that makes a bit of sense to you and covers some bases, I'd love to see a thumbs up or a heart. Just click that button. It'd be really great to see if this is making sense. Or, indeed, if you've got any questions about it, let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear if you've got any questions too. Okay, now I've got another side to this download too. So on the back, good to see the hearts and the thumbs up coming through. On the back, you'll see a very similar sheet. Let me see if I can get it without the reflection, probably there. But the logos are different. The icons are a little bit different. Can you guess what this might be for? So I've had this created in order that students could choose their lesson order. When students have that little bit of autonomy in a lesson about choosing what they do, I find they can get much more motivated about what's going on. It's when we always come in and say, right, arpeggios, right, pieces, right, let's do some sight reading, that things can get a little bit mundane, and they can feel that they're a little bit disassociated with what's going on in the lesson. Mind you, sometimes that's great. Routine can be really, really good for students too, and so I will generally do these sheets more often than not in this order. So repertoire first, technique first, written music second, and creativity last. But I often like to flip it up the other way as well and start with the creative work. Kind of depends what the student comes into a lesson with. Sometimes they will have had great fun with whatever creative activity it was, so we go with that first. Or maybe I sometimes still say, well, let's do the technical work and get that done, then we'll hear your creative work. So you can mix up the order. But what's this sheet for? Well, this is for students to be able to pick what they want to do. So obviously for younger students, you could explain what the symbols mean. So our scales and arpeggios are like running on the treadmill here. Drills are like your sit-ups, and oral rhythm and sight reading, you can see the person with the headphones on here. So you could say to students, okay, well, it's your turn to choose what's going on this lesson. You need to choose one box from each line. Which one would you like to do today? And you need to be ready, obviously, with some material for each of those areas. So a little Jane might say, I want to do some drills. All right, so we'll do some drills today. And they could circle it maybe. Now, the next line, we've got completed repertoire. That's with the person hanging. We've got easy reads or 1 week pieces is the little barbell guy, not having to do too much there. And the challenging repertoire is the one where they're trying to lift a very heavy bar. So your student might go, oh, I want to work on some easy reads this week. Okay, so we could do that. And finally at the bottom, improvising and composing is this dancer, just having a little bit of fun here. We've got skipping person for the lead sheet playing, and off-page activities where they're just kind of floating in midair. So they could choose, you know what, I want to do some improvising today. Okay. Now, of course, when we let students choose things like this, we might be missing out on a key area. So it might be that, well, they haven't selected scales. So when it comes to giving students options like this, I always still take the lead as the teacher to say, well, you know what, yes, let's do some drills, but I really need to hear that A minor scale that you've been working on for the last few weeks, because I don't want to miss a week when you might be playing it wrong or something like that. So you can always throw in a little bit of something else if it's important, but the student will feel like they've got the autonomy to choose what they're doing in a lesson. So that's my approach for this. On the other side, of course, is the teacher version. So this is just a way to help you yourself structure a music lesson that hopefully isn't overwhelming. It's not like the Foxtel that's just got a million channels and you're trying to watch 3 minutes of every channel. You're going to dive deeply into just 3 areas: technique, repertoire, and creativity. So that's my overview. I hope that's helped. Great to see a number of people watching live, and hopefully some more will watch the replay. If you have any questions, please ask me now. It'll be great to hear what you think. This is just my approach. I'm not suggesting you must use it or it will work for you necessarily. But as I say, just going back to the lesson that I talked about right at the start, the lesson I learnt right at the start with James, it's so easy to feel like you have to do everything in 30 minutes or 45 minutes. Or an hour even, and you just don't have to. And in fact, it's much better to do a few things more deeply than skirt across the top of 1,000 things. It's so much more meaningful for students to get deep into what they're going to be learning about. And look, sometimes if a student, if I don't have a particular deadline or a concert or an exam or something like that, and a student comes in and they are completely absorbed in some fantastic creative activity, then I won't necessarily feel like, okay, now we've got to do our scales, now we've got to do some repertoire. I might just stick to the creative track and go with it for a whole lesson. That's okay. It's okay to not try and cover everything. And particularly if a student is really passionate about something and enjoying it, then being able to spend a whole lesson on it could be really, really positive for that student. And of course, the other great advantage of having more time on just one thing is that, let's say they're doing some improvising or composing, maybe they can go that extra step and start writing something down that you'd never normally have time for. Or maybe if they're doing some challenging repertoire, maybe you can go, and that's all they're doing that lesson, maybe they can go a little bit deeper into that repertoire and you can learn a bit more about the composer. And so connect some of those general knowledge type things into there. Maybe if they're doing some scales, you can connect some oral work in there and get them listening and playing some music as well. Like there's lots of ways to do this, but just keep it simple. 3 keys is all you need, in my opinion. Peter, thank you very much for your comment. Off to the gym, that's awesome. I'll be going for a ride later. This weather over here is just superb now. It's going to be great to finally get on the bike and not absolutely be freezing and rugged up. So I hope the weather's good wherever you are around the world. Thank you very much for joining me today. I hope that's helpful. And again, if you would like a copy of this as your reference, just grab it, timtopham.com/3keys, the number 3 and KEYS. And I hope it's useful to you. Feel free to leave any comments after this as well. If you wish, I'll make sure I check in and see them. All right, everyone. Thank you very much for joining me live today, and good luck with your teaching over the next couple of weeks. I know over here we've got school holidays. In fact, some people may already be on school holidays for 2 or 3 weeks. For those of you who have just started the fall semester over in the States, then best wishes to you guys for the upcoming couple of weeks. I will see you really soon. Thanks, guys. Oh, and don't forget too, next weekend, this time next week, I'll be doing my webinar, my next free online training, all about group teaching and converting to group teaching. That is next week at this same time. Make sure you grab a seat for that. There will be a replay if you can't make it live. And to find out about that, timtopham.com/training will get you your ticket to that event. It's going to be really great fun. I've got a very special guest helping me with that webinar. And I will see you then. Bye-bye.